Okay, so I'm Amy Jenness, a MFA student graduate in January of 2021, and I'd like to welcome Pam Petro, our guest this evening.
Thank you so much, Amy, and thank you, Cambridge Common Writers. It's really, really good to be here, especially to be interviewed by one of my star students in nonfiction, creative nonfiction, go genre. So it's wonderful to get a chance to talk to you, Amy.
So in the long field, you introduced the Welsh concept of hiraeth.
Yep.
So kind of,
Hiraeth.
sort of said it right.
Hiraeth. Roll that R, Amy. Hiraeth.
Hiraeth.
Yes.
Which loosely translated for us Americans is the longing for something or someone lost. And so this seems to me, as I was reading it, a little bit like a new viewpoint for American readers of memoir. We are very familiar with memoirs that talk about the search for identity or connection to place. But I'm wondering if hiraeth is sort of part of those two ideas, or if it's something completely different.
Okay. Perfect question. So hiraeth is something that is contained, is part of those ideas, but exceeds and surrounds those ideas, I would say. Hiraeth it gets translated into English. It's one of those non-translatable words, so they say, that comes into English as homesickness, as longing, as nostalgia. And it is all of those things, but not adequately expressed by any of them. It is, what did you say? A longing for someone or something lost. Yes, something that's you've left in the past that has left a hole in your present. But that could be, it could be a place, it could be a person, it could be a version of yourself that a certain place or a certain group of people allowed you to be. Or it could be the future that's always just slipping over the next hill, that's inaccessible to you. And as you move closer toward it, it recedes ahead of you. And to some people, that's an expression of God. But it's also an expression of self, that self you never quite becoming. So I like to think of it as reaching backwards, reaching forwards, like holding a yoga pose in two directions at once, searching for the once and future king, that King Arthur will come again at that moment of Wales' greatest need, but not right now. He was in the past and he'll be in the future, but not in the present. So that's why the book is subtitled Wales and the Presence of Absence, a memoir. It's that understanding of absence. And that, yes, I think that's often rooted in place. But then place is a reflection of identity as well. So there, I was looking up definitions of home, right? A home is both where you reside permanently, and another definition is where you flourish most. So there's that sense of seeking that home that allows you to be your best self. And we never feel like we become our best selves. We're always in search of that or looking back toward it. So identity and place are very much described by hiraeth. I think it's the bigger sort of expression of that human longing, within which are these subsets of place and self. Right. Does that make sense? That's a long answer.
It does. And I love that you brought in the fact that it's not the present. It's either the past or the future, but it's not right now. And I feel like if I could make a generalization,
please,
that as Americans, I think we're the idea that somehow we will reach the end of the path and we will have arrived, whatever that is. And Hiraeth sort of implies that you never quite arrive. You're always in this state of looking back or looking forward.
Exactly. And I think a lot of what I talk about in the book is that Hiraeth describes a state of incompleteness. It's you don't ever get there. You're not ever complete. But that place in the middle between maybe a place where someone resides permanently and the place you flourish, if they're not the same thing, you're in between. And being in between is difficult, but the creative place. I think that's where we're forced to use our imagination. Longing spurs not just nostalgia, sort of, inert nostalgia where you just feel but don't do anything about it. Hiraeth goes one step further. I think it describes that creative step toward inventing something to make up for loss.
Right.
And I think that's what really excites me about Hiraeth. The Welsh would say no. They would say, oh, Hiraeth is a curse. It just pulls us backward, longing for the has been and never was of an unconquered Wales. And it does that, but it also takes that it's the creative combustion. And Welsh culture to me it flows out of Hiraeth. The myths, the music, the hymns, the literature, all of that.
Well, I was just going to say, I would say that Hiraeth is very much a part of American culture. We just call it different things.
Right. Exactly. And I think it's this, Hiraeth gives us a chance. Having a new word to apply to something makes you investigate it, makes you look at all the facets of it, rather than just saying, oh, she feels homesick. And that's kind of flat. If we put a new word that we have to think about, we look at all those facets, which aren't just sad or nostalgic, but they have that creative quality.
I agree. So I want to geek out for a minute and talk about the structure of the long field, which is this very intricate braid. And I keep coming back to this visualization of braiding hair or braiding like strips of leather and what it's like to do that. And you have to keep attention on the three things that you're braiding while you're intertwining them. And I keep coming back to that visualization as I think about the braid that you created for the long field. It's like it has a tension, but it also has a sort of serpentine feel to it as you move back and forth between time and between two countries and between different parts of your life. And it's just, I mean, this isn't really a question. I'm just telling you how much I loved the structure of it. And you introduced me to a braided essay in one of your seminars, and I kind of fell in love with it. And so here's my actual question. I know that your personal story was less part of the early drafts, but how do you think shifting the story to make it more personal and to make it one of the strands of this braid changed the work?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, to be totally honest, it was trying to write a book about Wales in which I was just introducing Americans to this idea of Hiraeth and to Wales, and agents hated it. I kept sending it out. I sent it to 9 agents before one took it, and then he couldn't even sell it. But they were saying, there's not enough of you in here. You need to be in the book. And I really didn't want to. Where's the through story, Pam? That's another thing I kept hearing, where, you're not only not present, there's no arc, what's missing. So gradually, it occurred to me, there's a long background to it, but I won't get into that. I'll just say it hit me one day that I was absent from a book about absence. And I just thought, okay, that's stupid. That's a problem. You're saying I quote a Welsh scholar in the book saying that hiraeth is something at once very Welsh and an enduring human experience. And I was providing the very Welsh part, but not universalizing it through basic experiences that humans have with love, finding a partner and the difficulties in that. Threats, physical bodily threats. I was in a train wreck and almost died. Through the aging and loss of parents. And then beyond that, things we all encounter, technology, how technology creates before and after periods, and we start assigning emotional value to them. So I needed to be the lightning rod for these things. And as soon as I put myself in the book, it was like lightning struck it. And I started to see all kinds of parallels between my experiences of hiraeth and the hiraeth stories of Wales. A very quick example is megaliths. I'd always wanted to write about the standing stones, the cromlechs, the Neolithic monuments of Wales, because I always, you encounter them when you first go there, and you think, what are they for? What did people spend?
What were they thinking?
What were they thinking? It took years to put these things in place. Why? And we've been asking that since the Celts arrived around whenever, 500 BC. What? That's a present absence in the landscape. Why? We'll never know. What's it like to live in that kind of culture? And then I started thinking, but you know what? We all experience this in our lives. With just one generation apart from us, we're not able to ask our parents certain questions, or they get to a point in time with dementia or other illnesses where they can't tell us. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is a braid. And humans and rocks, there's such a similarity. We put our hopes and dreams in carving rocks and send them forward in time without us and hoping they'll carry our messages. And then the rocks later, different generations assign them human names. The megaliths there are all kinds of stories about them. Standing stones that go dancing at the beach on moonlit nights.
Cool. Yeah.
So these are the kinds of things, these parallels that I never saw until I entered the book. So it changed radically, hopefully for the better.
And I would say, I'm not sure you really fleshed this out a lot, but you do say, your dad was a collector of rocks and was interested in rocks. And I know, you've talked about your last name being related to the things to do with rocks, and you create these artworks called petroglyphs. So it doesn't surprise me that you were fascinated by the monolith.
I think that was already on my radar.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Cool. Let's see. So I know it took you a long time to write the book, many drafts, and then a long time to sell it. But for me, it felt like it arrived perfectly on time in the middle of a pandemic when we're all sitting at home, and we've all been feeling a longing for the way things used to be. And so it really spoke to me as I was reading it, sort of in that mind space of trying to deal with the pandemic. So how do you think COVID's disruption defined or redefined what hiraeth means to you?
That's really interesting, because by the time I was editing the book, we were into the pandemic. It was 2020, but the book was written. So the pandemic didn't enter the book itself, but how I feel, I definitely feel like I it came at a moment that it was sort of, here's the book, here's like a baton. Okay, pandemic, run with this, because the pandemic described absences. It's a long field is I should say, the title of the book comes from one derivation of the phrase hiraeth, here long eith field. So the long field is that which separates you from what's on the other side. So the pandemic was the ultimate long field, separating us from places we loved, from people we loved, taking people away, both through distance and death, not allowing us to go back to places where we could be our best selves. The pandemic illustrated everything I was talking about. It's kind of creepy. God, did I call it down? So it's almost a lived analogy for what the idea of hiraeth represents. Right. And it's something we all did, not just as our society, but as humans on the earth. And we're all mortal. We're all subject to illness and vulnerable. We're vulnerable to it. And hiraeth is about that vulnerability to forces beyond us, to illness, to aging, mortality, to injustice, to simply growing up away from our childhoods that we maybe cherished and wish
and
we could
have
be.
I think also included in that is having to accept a future that you don't know what it is yet.
Absolutely. And there's that great unknown that you're always moving toward, and that's both exciting and terrifying.
Right.
What's over that next hill? Well, I want to see, but I know what's happening here. I'm worried about that too.
Yeah. And if you don't mind, I'm actually going to jump to the last question that I sent you, because I think it's tying into what we're talking about here. Okay. And it's correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the sense that the opposite of hiraeth is being in the present and feeling grateful for what is right now. But I just find now in those moments where I get the thing that I've been missing, whether it's I'm in a room with people that I love who I haven't seen for a long time, or I'm able to think about taking a trip, it's almost like it's too easy to go back and just be like, oh, good, okay, I'm going to parties again. I'm making myself stop and just for a second be like, this is the thing I've been longing for, and feel grateful for it, and make myself feel grateful for it, instead of just being like, oh, good, everything's back to normal. So
wonderful.
So my question is related to that. I know that after 2 years of not being able to go to Wales for the Dylan Thomas Summer School in Creative Writing, of which you run the program.
Yes, put in a pitch, come to Wales.
Come to Wales. But it looks like it's on track for 2022. So what have you been missing, and what will you be most appreciative of when you get there?
Oh, well, that's a beautiful question. I'm going to answer it in two parts. One is that there is, thanks to Welsh, there is another word that represents exactly what you're talking about. If hiraeth is an excavation of the present, because you're longing for something in the past or in the future that's in another place, spatially beyond you. Hwyl, H-W-Y-L, another Welsh word, represents inhabiting the present moment fiercely and fully with soaring great spirits.
I love that.
I do too. I love that. And I think life, honestly, is a balance between those two things. And these two Welsh words represent both poles. Hiraeth is always present, but there are things that drive it away. And there are those moments when you rekindle and I kind of burn the hiraeth off. And I think certain things do it. Cooking does it. Cooking from a family recipe that hasn't been cooked into life in 50 years, which is something I did during the pandemic. speaking a language like Welsh, which is ancient. I'm using the same words that were used thousands of years ago. Gardening, the being present for your garden and watching it rise again from winter. I mean, they're good things. But for me in Wales, coming back, I was there in November. I kind of cheated. But every single time I go to Wales, I take the train from London. I come into the south. I take the train up to Carmarthen or maybe Swansea, and I rent a car. And then I drive up to Lampeter, which is where I'm from in Welsh. I just described myself to somebody as more than American and less than Welsh after all this time. As I'm driving up the A485 to Lampeter, there's a moment when I come around a certain bend and all the green just presses into my windshield. And it's a green that doesn't exist here in the States. It's like the definition of green. It's this green, because it rains so much. And it's luminous. It's like it's lit from below. And I think to myself the same thing. How do I live in the States without this color? How do I live without this place? And yet I do, because there are things I love here, people I love here more maybe, my partner. But the quality of the air that has a weight to it, a silky texture and a weight, the quality of the water that's also silky and fresh and almost peppery. I miss these things. They're emblems of Wales to me. The accent, which is like a perfect audio analog for the landscape. It's hilly. It goes up and down and up and down. The Welsh talk like this. And my friends whose accents I love, all of these things I've missed. That's what I always miss. What will I appreciate most? The first thing I'll appreciate most are Welsh cakes.
Ah.
I love Welsh cakes.
Oh, okay.
Little griddle cakes about so big.
Is their cuisine really different than other
not really.
Other parts of the UK?
No, not really. Welsh cakes are just a specialty of Wales. They're little griddle cakes done on top of the stove, in butter, lots of butter. They have currants in them, and you sprinkle sugar on top.
Ooh, yum.
Really,
that
really
sounds good.
That's that is like one of the rituals. I have to go get a Welsh cake.
Cool.
But I'll just appreciate being there, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Well, I feel like you've put us there. That was a beautiful description of the, your sensory experience of Wales.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're running out of time, so I'm going to sneak the last one in. And it's another geeky structure, tone, writery kind of question. But the themes of loss, absence, and longing are kind of heavy themes. And sometimes the book has a little bit of a lonely feel. But I also feel like you've created this narrative voice that's very light, and it's just friendly, and it feels like you're taking the reader by the arm and you're saying, here, come with me, and I'm going to show you my experience of Wales. And so sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's insightful, and sometimes you're just a really great travel companion. So were you really thinking about that light, heavy and light sort of not contradiction, but contrast as you were writing it?
That's another good geeky question. To tell the actual truth, absolute truth, I was not thinking about that contrast. I was very much aware of the tone of the book. And it wasn't hiraeth that I was trying to offset, really, because I just found the subjects that hiraeth sort of brought alive so interesting and and then I found this creative side to it. When I got to that, I thought, okay, this is going to be able to lift the book. And at the end, coming to a point of hul, inhabiting the moment. I felt like that balanced the kind of longing. The tone came from me reading other books that are memoirs that also investigate ideas, and I find them really ponderous. And I think that authors often come across as self-important, or they're like oracles. They make statements, and it's just like, oh, come on, are you really an expert on this? And I'm not an expert on here, right? I'm not an etymologist or a linguist. I've read a lot of Welsh literature, but I don't have a PhD in Welsh literature. It's something I love, but I'm an expert because I'm human. And I think that's ultimately hiraeth is an expression of humanity. And I wanted to get across the point that I am accessible. Hiraeth is accessible. We are accessible to one another. And I just wanted to write something that I would want to read ultimately. And I wanted to keep popping that ponderous bubble. So it's written in very consciously in a conversational tone.
Right.
And, I'll say something like, if you think that the Druids sacrificed people on Stonehenge, quit it, because they didn't, so quit thinking that way.
Right.
Like I would to a friend. And so I think the readers are friends. If they're reading the book, they're kinds of friends.
Right.
So I can be both confidential and confide in them, and I can yell at them too.
Is there any final words you'd like to share with us? A question I haven't asked, or
no, I would just say how grateful I am to Cambridge Common Writers for providing the forum, and to you for really thinking hard about something that took me 9 years to write. And I just feel, seen and considered, and that's all any of us ever want.
Yeah.
Cynefin is something we didn't talk about, which is just one last useful phrase in Welsh, a sense that you feel at home in a place you've never been before. And that's what happened to me in Wales. And when you're an American student and you're on a 1.5 year long MA course and you have to go home, if you feel Cynefin, you will feel hiraeth. And I think this is something that happens to a lot of us.
Right.
So Cynefin is a useful term too. And I think it's something a lot of people experience. I've gotten so many emails from people all over saying, I feel Cynefin when I go to Iceland. I feel it when I go to Spain.
Yeah.
But I live in Canada, so I have a hiraeth on me for Spain. So
yeah,
I'm not alone.
It's always so interesting to see where the places are that you connect to. I traveled in Italy for a while, which I found to be unbelievably chaotic and kind of it was stressful, and then I went to Assisi, and it was like I never wanted to leave. I just connected so much to that place, and it just felt like I had always been there and I would always be there. And then the rest of the country was too much for me, but that one place was amazing.
Place and identity. It was kind of a reflection of you. Yeah. And I think so Cynefin is something that mediates between that interior imagination and memory that we take everywhere we go and the exterior world. That's what's so cool about Cynefin. It's like deja vu, but it's more, it's not repetition, it's recognition.
Right.
Of self in place.
You feel it sort of in your soul.
Exactly. Your soul's geography that you've stumbled upon.
Yes.
That's not me. That's somebody else said that, but
it's good though. It's good.
Good. So yeah, thank you, Amy. This has been
my
great.
pleasure. My pleasure. You know, in the past, when I've interviewed authors about their works, I always finish by saying, "And what are you working on now?" But I have a feeling maybe you're resting.
I'm resting. Actually, you kind of touched on it. Maybe I'm going to do something with rocks and Petro and place and petrographs, and we'll see.